Hey, I'm Kyle, the creator of Nightmare Tag, and welcome to Devlog number 5. I have a feeling this will be the shortest devlog. I say this because there wasn't any big foundational systems that I had to build for this update. I just had to build on top of things that I've already set up, and I've been very excited to work on an update like this. The main focus in this update were 3 new playable characters and the Slingshot, which doesn't really sound like a lot, but completely changes the way the game's played. I started this update by working on the Crow, which is the new playable monster, and the main idea behind it is that it can grow and shrink its size. I just thought it would be really fun to chase people as a really big monster, and it would be equally as scary to run away from it. Also, the thought of tracking people as a very small bird flying around in the dream world seems like a lot of fun as well. I started this update with the Crow for a couple of reasons. One is that I've already had a rough plan for this monster for a while now, so getting started on it was no problem. And 2, there's potentially a lot of bugs surrounding scaling, so I wanted to start testing on it as soon as possible. And before I get into any details about scaling, I should talk about the movement first. The Crow can grab onto any surface to climb and throw itself around. Holding both triggers in midair will make you glide, and adjusting your wings is how you steer that gliding. And all of this was fairly easy to implement. The hard part was actually doing the calculations for the gliding velocity. I spent a day trying to write it from scratch, but I ran into a problem where tilting up would slow down your velocity, and then it would just freeze you in midair. And I didn't really come up with a clean solution that day, so I tried to sleep on it and tackle it the next day. But as I was going to bed, I was thinking, I just want this to feel like the Minecraft Elytra, but with VR controls. So the next day, I looked up if anyone recreated the code for the Elytra, and boom, within my first Google search, there it was. So, shout out this guy for speeding up development. But it wasn't as easy as just dragging and dropping it into this project. I had to rework it a bit so that it worked in VR. Because Minecraft uses your screen direction to determine your gliding direction, but I want to use controller positions to give that intuitive gliding control that you come to expect in VR. But thankfully, I did a lot of that work the previous day when I was trying to write it from scratch. So I just had to change the input for the Elytra code to the code I was working with yesterday, and boom, gliding was in the game. Climbing was also really easy to implement. I copied over most of the human climbing code, but I removed some of the restrictions, like stamina and the wall angle limit. And I increased the climb speed and the throw power to make you really feel like a wild creature flinging itself around. So now let's talk about the scaling. The Crow has 3 sizes it can shift into. Small, which is very small, very hard for humans to see. It's almost like the size of like a Lego figure. And then we have medium, which is about half the size of a human. And then big, which is like quadruple the size of a human. And the size determines a few things, like your movement speed and your claw damage. Small does almost no damage, medium is a 3-hit kill, and big is a 2-hit kill. So attacking players in your biggest form is the right strategy, and it's lots of fun to chase around little humans from this new perspective. But you can't rely on being big. There's a few solid counters to the big Crow. One is crawl spaces. Every map besides Heaven has crawl spaces or little openings in the walls. Escaping through these when getting chased by the big Crow is a very smart thing to do. Also, because the hitbox is so much bigger, humans can easily burn and stun the big Crow. And I recently added a balancing change that reduces the Crow's damage when it's burned. So the percentage it's burned is the percentage of damage reduction. So a fully burned Crow will do little to no damage. And if you are playing as the big Crow and you're getting overwhelmed by human attacks, you gotta scale all the way down to your small mode. This is essentially your seeker mode for the Crow. In this state, you can't be fully blinded, so you can escape and replan your attack. Also, when you're small, you can see sounds through walls, which is the same as the Mimic. So if you're looking for targets, scale all the way down and fly around till you pick up on something. Also, throwing yourself and gliding is much faster when you're small, so traversing around the map as the small Crow is the way to go. Plus, it's a lot of fun to zoom around as like a little fly. But scaling took a while to get right, and I started by being able to scale just any character. And I didn't realize how many systems needed to factor in the player scale for them to function properly. If a calculation needed the head or the hand positions, I had to double check if it was a local or a global calculation, and then factor in the player scale accordingly. And like I said, there's potentially many exploits to do with scaling, but to combat a lot of it, I just do some validation checks before you scale up. When you're scaling down, I don't really need to validate anything because you're just going to be smaller than you are now, meaning you won't accidentally no-clip into anything. But for scaling up, I do have to check if the new player collider intersects with anything, and that's exactly what I do. When you're scaling up, the color of your FOV visuals along the side indicate the size that you're going to shift into, and it's constantly checking if there's enough space for you to scale up. It simply just checks if your new collider size is going to intersect with any of the environment. So red indicates the biggest size you can scale into, so if you see red along the sides of your vision, that means it's passed all the validation checks and you're good to scale up. One request I got a handful of times was to further complicate the validation system, just to make it easier for crows to scale up in tight spaces. For example, you'll find that you can't scale up when you're pressed up against a wall. It's because the validation system is colliding with the wall that you're sitting right next to. You gotta kind of put yourself in the middle of a room, and sometimes even crouch in real life to give yourself enough headroom for the validation system to pass. And I really could further complicate this. Like if the first check doesn't pass, I could check for the closest wall and then offset the validation system to check for valid areas nearby, which is what I do for monkeys when they jump into corners, just so they don't clip out of the map. I could even check if a clamped height version of your collider fits in that space. A player collider with its height clamped is when you're standing in real life, but your player is in a crawl space. There's like a special calculation that forces the collider inside a tight space even though you should be taller. Like when you die in a crawl space but then you get revived while you're standing, I gotta calculate the right collider height and player position to properly position you in that crawl space. The same calculations are used when you use a portal tape in a crawl space or you shoot a warp shot into a tight spot. The point is, I have the code to do these checks, but I'm making a conscious decision not to add them to this system. One reason for this is that it could potentially add more exploits. I can see how there might be weird spots in the map that trick the validation system, allowing the crow to consistently no clip out of the playable area. And that could have been refined, but my second reason is that I think it just makes the crow harder to play as, which is a good thing. It makes smaller spaces feel safer for humans, and it does make the crow a little more frustrating to play as, but if you understand that you need the space to scale up, it seems fair. Now let's talk about the crow's perks, starting with Monkey Talk. I want this monster to feel like a wild animal, so I themed all its abilities around the animals. Monkey Talk allows the crow to communicate with monkeys. The crow will call out to all the monkeys within the zone, and if a monkey sees a human, it will expose them, but only to the crow that called out. And I'm not sure if I've clarified this before, but there's exposure perks and spirit guide perks. Exposure perks are like entity eyes, where if an entity eye sees a human, it's exposed to all the monsters. Spirit guide perks are like can't work alone, where the players are only exposed to you. So Monkey Talk is technically a spirit guide perk because it is only revealing the humans to the crow that called out to them. Anyway, this ability is button activated, which I don't love. I usually like when abilities are passively activated or use some sort of motion gesture. The other reason I don't love it is because you have to constantly remind yourself that you have this ability and to use it whenever you can. What would be really fun is if I found a way to detect players making monkey noises and that's how you activate the ability. But that's kind of out of scope for now. Besides all that, the perk is still pretty fun because it feels like Marco Polo, and the sound blends in with all the other monkey noises. The only way for humans to tell if the monkey is snitching on them is if the monkey chirps are just a little too frequent. Monkey Talk wasn't as effective as I had hoped. I thought humans would run past monkeys a lot more frequently. Also, if you suspected someone was camping invisible somewhere, you couldn't bring the monkey into a room to snitch on them. So the crow needed a new way to locate humans. So keeping on theme with animals and reusing the controls for ripping out entity eyes, I came up with echo leeches. The basic idea is that they're kind of like a sonar parasite that can echolocate humans. The crow will rip out these leeches from its mouth and place them throughout the map. On a set frequency, they will emit a sound that will echolocate any human within its line of sight. And if it does see someone, it will emit a different noise to alert you. And there's a particle effect that you can see through walls in the leech's location. And if that human is invisible, it will temporarily kick them out of it, and you can upgrade this to expose them through walls, just like the exposure on entity eyes. So unlike Monkey Talk, the Echo Leech will expose the humans to all the monsters. In a way, this fixes every problem that I had with Monkey Talk. You can intentionally place it anywhere that you like, it reuses an immersive control scheme, and it pings on a frequency so you don't have to remember to click a button constantly. This next perk is called Poison Dive, and it's pretty simple. When the crow is in its smallest form, it can fly into humans to poison them. But honestly, it's pretty hard to fly into humans, especially when you're that small. And there's a branch to upgrade your radius, but still, humans move very unpredictably. And because it's so hard to hit, I made the poison duration decently long, giving you time to scale up and finish the kill. I did think about making this perk a little easier to apply poison damage. I was thinking that it would leave behind a trail of poison so that any humans that walk into that trail get poisoned, but I got stuck on how do I activate an ability like that because I don't think the small crow should constantly leave behind a trail of poison. So the only solution I could come up in my head was to make that ability button activated, but I thought you're already pressing both of the triggers to glide, you would have to press another button on top of that to activate the trail, but that just seems like too much, and I already had the passively activated way in place, so I just went with that and moved forward. I think every monster's set of perks should cover 3 things. 1 is locating humans, so Monkey Talk and Echo Leech cover that. 2 is poison, so slowing down your targets, especially if humans are just juking you out or outplaying you, it's nice to have an ability that can slow them down. And 3 is an electric disruption perk, which is great against humans that heavily rely on their tools, or just to temporarily stop the tape from being played in VHS run. So this next perk, which I call Corrupt Fish, is the crow's electric disruption perk. And I'm glad I got to add this a little later in development because I needed to see how easy it was to maneuver around as the crow. The entity's electric disruption perk is a little overpowered because of its movement in seeker mode. You're invisible and you can move really fast, and you see the electric objects when they're activated, so you can get right up close to these objects with ease and disable them, and there's not much that the humans can do about it. That being said, the crow's movement is what shaped this ability. The crow has a hard time staying close to its target because it's either flinging itself very fast or it's kind of soaring past the target, and there's no real way to slow yourself down or match the speed of a human. But this kind of sporadic movement is good for applying damage. It's what naturally balances the game across all the monsters. But the crow especially has a harder time staying close to the target, which is why I think it needs an ability that can automatically detonate. And keeping with the animal theme, I went with the idea that the crow can spawn in a corrupt fish. It looks like a normal fish, except it swims directly at the closest active electronic object, and if the fish gets close enough to that object, or it hits a wall, or it swims until its duration timer runs out, it detonates an electric pulse around itself in a small radius. This perk is also button activated, which I don't love, but I can't think of another good way to activate this perk, so if you can think of something cool, let me know. So after the basic crow structure was in place, and before I even had all the crow's perks figured out, I started working on the next human character. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit character ideas out there, and an athlete is just one of those ideas. Also, I just really wanted to diversify the character models in the skins, because Antonio and Charles pretty much share the exact same geometry, they just have different UV maps, but that's just something you might notice if you participate in the skin contests. Anyway, I feel like I say this in every devlog, but I've definitely improved on my 3D modeling skills yet again, and it's thanks to making all these new characters, and I'm really happy with the way that all of them turned out. So Sadie is the athlete character. Her perks revolve around movement, which is core to this game, making her really useful. The first perk that I added to Sadie is Adrenaline Rush. This perk was really easy to conceptualize and implement. If she gets hit by a monster, she gets a temporary speed boost. This was way more powerful than I thought, so I had to increase the cooldown by a lot. The next perk that I added is Runner's High. This was also very easy to conceptualize and implement. If Sadie runs at a consistent speed for a set time, she gets a temporary speed boost. And this didn't really need any balancing. After that I added Power Climber, which increases Sadie's climb speed and climbing stamina. This is really useful if you climb a lot in this game. I had a hard time deciding Sadie's last perk. A lot of my other ideas were just more speed boost, and I don't think she needed any more of that. So I went with an idea that was a little different, but similar to Runner's High. If Sadie runs for a certain amount of time, while she's holding her slingshot, it will recharge the battery by a little bit. I call this perk Second Wind. Madison's whole character is that she's a medic, and this is probably the most requested character. Most people suggested a medic character with healing or reviving abilities, and I did a bit of that, but I think her true usefulness comes from awareness. The first perk I think I added was Revitalize. This perk could have been predicted. You get hit by the monster and your health regen speed is temporarily increased. But this perk kind of suffers the same flaws as Sadie's Adrenaline Rush perk. A lot of the monsters are 2-hit kills at close range, so it only really helps when you get hit once. But I actually do find this happens quite often, so that recovery speed might help you survive another close call. Next I want to talk about Revive Cloak, even though I think it was the last Madison perk that I added. This perk also could have been predicted. Some people suggested similar ideas where there's a window of time after getting revived to escape, and this would be kind of like a counter to the monsters that camp revive bodies. I think there's a lot of ways that any character can use to counter monsters camping revive bodies, but now there's a perk that can directly counter this playstyle. So Revive Cloak will briefly make the person that you revive invisible, and if you really want, you can upgrade this perk to make you invisible as well. I love this perk because it often leaves the monster very confused. This next perk, which I call Pain Signal, is where the awareness really starts to come into play. When a teammate gets hurt, Madison is alerted of their position and they're exposed, but only to that Madison. So this makes it a Spirit Guide perk. This is a great perk to have enabled because you can passively tell where the monster is without having to scan. Maybe you decide to run away from your teammates getting attacked, or you decide to help, that's up to you. Madison's last perk is called Pulse Check, and it's similar to Pain Signal, but instead of getting activated by the event of teammates getting damaged, this perk will periodically check for revived bodies and expose them to you, making this another Spirit Guide perk. Again, this is just super helpful for awareness. I tend to head straight to these pings because I want to win, and keeping your team alive greatly increases your chances of winning. It's also great for passively knowing how much of your team is dead without checking the scanner. Some players suggested a perk that would increase the base health value on humans, and I didn't really want to add a perk like this because I think it would ruin the nature of the game. 2 hits to kill is core to this game, and it makes monsters lethally scary, but still allows for close calls and tight escapes. And I swear I talk about that in the first devlog, so I won't get into it here. The point is, if Madison was the only character that could survive a 2-hit kill, I'm afraid she'd be the only character that people choose to play as. One of the biggest changes coming in this update is the Slingshot, which completely replaces the flash gun. This turned out to be way more controversial than I thought. So many people expressed their feelings about the flash gun being removed, and I kept having to repeat my reasons, and I feel pretty strongly about it. So if you're one of those people and I pointed you here for answers, hello? These are all my reasons. The flash gun beam has been tweaked and balanced in literally every update, and I never felt like I found the perfect sweet spot with it. The main problem was that you needed to consistently apply damage over time to fully stun the monster, which looked like just tracking the monster with a laser beam. But Nightmare Tag has intentionally evolved into a fast-paced tag game, leaving little time to apply damage needed to stop the monster from advancing at you, which led to me implementing a quick burn system. I'm not going to explain that here because I've already explained that in previous devlogs, but there's essentially a 3-second window of time to apply triple damage. The math worked out so that you could fully stun a monster by yourself in less than 3 seconds. The problem with it being a laser beam and having a quick burning system is that it's almost too easy to hit your shots against monsters. If you're the monster approaching a human that understood the right range, you almost always ended up blinded. You still need that bit of time to fully stun the monster, so it never even worked at close range. But if you knew that range, the monster didn't feel like a threat because it was too easy to hit your shot with a laser beam. Fundamentally changing the beam into individual shots fixes a lot of these problems. Individual shots makes it a lot easier to miss, so I can make each shot more meaningful and apply more damage. And because a hit with a pellet is a one-time event, it makes sense to apply damage instantly instead of over time like the beam, making it more useful in close quarters. So just to reiterate everything, the beam is too easy to hit, and with a quick burning system, humans outside of a certain range would almost always stun the monster and run away, and applying damage over time made the flash gun useless in close quarters. The Slingshot fixes these problems by turning the beam into individual shots, greatly increasing your chances of missing, allowing me to increase the damage and apply damage instantly. So here's how the Slingshot works. The Slingshot automatically spawns a pellet in between the bands if it has enough battery. You could grab this pellet with your other hand to pull it back and aim, then you just release it to shoot. Pellets can be superheated to apply more damage. With the hand holding the handle, hold down the trigger. This will drain the battery, but it will charge up the pellet, and the pellet takes 3 seconds to be fully charged. After that, you're just wasting battery, and the charge is indicated by the pellet and the bands glowing brighter, and these little light indicators along the arms. In the current version of the game, the Slingshot has a capacity of 10 fully charged shots, which is equivalent to 30 seconds of charge up time. The battery is displayed along these 2 bars in the middle. After you shoot a charged up shot, there's a heat boost, which is indicated by this light in the center. The heat boost makes charging up your next shot faster. For example, shooting a max charge shot will give you 2 times charge speed boost for 3 seconds, meaning it actually only takes 1.5 seconds to fully charge up your next shot. This will drain your battery faster, but the system allows you to stun monsters quickly, because it actually takes more than 1 shot to fully stun a monster. And I didn't have to restructure any of the monster damage system for the Slingshot because it uses the same burnable system as everything else in the game, so I'll be explaining everything in time burned. Even though the Slingshot takes 3 seconds to fully charge up, it applies 5 seconds of burn damage instantly, and for reference, monsters have a max burn time of 8 seconds, which means it takes slightly less than 2 fully charged shots to completely stun a monster. And I made it slightly less just to give you enough time to charge up your next shot, because while you're charging up your next shot, the monster's cooling down. So you kinda have 3 seconds to land your next shot, which is clean math considering that it only takes 1.5 seconds to charge up your next shot if you have the full speed boost. And in a way, this kinda mirrors the 2-hand touch philosophy I have with monsters. It takes 2 hits to kill humans, and now it takes 2 hits to fully stun a monster. Many people also wish there was a way to keep both the flash gun and the Slingshot, and now I'm going to explain why not. One is that I would have to continue finding a way to fix my issues with the flash gun, plus keep it balanced with the Slingshot that's also in play, which to me just sounds harder than trying to fix the flash gun alone. 2 is that it would kinda ruin attachment spawning. Attachments spawn on monkeys right now, and there's only 4 monkeys in every zone. So in VHS Run and Quick Tag, if you're playing on the smallest map, there's only 4 attachments being spawned. And between those 4 attachments, right now there's an equal 50-50 chance of it being a VHS tape or Slingshot attachment. But at least you can use either of those if you find it. If I allowed you to choose between the Slingshot and the flash gun, you might bump into an attachment you can't even use. And attachments are like game-changing abilities that can win you the game. And with only 4 attachments being spawned, the chances of you playing a match where you can't even use the attachments you see is pretty high. One little funny thing to note about the process of developing the Slingshot is that it actually started on the April Fool's update. I created the projectile system and hooked it up to the flash gun, but instead of shooting a pellet, you shot little lightning McQueens. And right away this felt way more balanced than the beam, and it was deeply satisfying to hit your shots. I ended up reworking a lot of the flash gun attachments for the Slingshot, starting with the laser beam, which is formerly known as the advanced beam. You still have to charge it up to release a high-powered beam that stays there after you shoot it, but the difference is that the new laser beam doesn't go through walls. Instead, it bounces off the walls. The longer you charge it up, the more it bounces, and this is really useful in hallways, allowing you to quickly block off the entire pathway. For some reason, I've had this vision for a while, so I'm glad reworking these attachments gave me the time to add this new feature. Portal Pellet is just the portal attachment, and there's no real change here. A portal linking to a random zone door will spawn where the pellet lands. The main difference is that I've updated the portal itself. The first thing you'll notice is that the portal is not projected onto the environment anymore, it's just a rectangle. And functionally, you can no longer burn it to keep it open. And this was just a network optimization decision so that the portal itself doesn't have to be an individual network object. There's a bunch of objects in the game that are only spawned temporarily and don't need anything synced, and in these cases I try not to spawn them as network objects. Instead, I just send a call out to all the clients to spawn an object of that type with those static parameters. For example, the more you charge up the portal pellet, the longer the portal stays active. So the server just has to tell all the clients, spawn a portal here for this long. The alternative is to spawn a portal as a network object and have the portal object itself broadcast those parameters. And the benefit to that is that we can attach a burnable system to it, because that needs to be networked per individual object. So this was just an optimization decision that came at the loss of a function, and I'm hoping people don't miss it. And I've started doing this to as many objects as I can, just to optimize network traffic. Like the laser beams also use this system. The server just says spawn beams here, here, and here for this duration. And now I bet you could guess all the objects that use this same system. Boom Blast shoots explosive pellets. This was really easy to conceptualize and implement. Explosive pellets is just another one of those low-hanging fruit ideas, and it was easy to implement because I reused some of the code from Drop Bomb. I just made the explosion size a variable based on how long you charged it up. This is also a good time to talk about the Drop Bomb rework. The problem with the Drop Bomb was that it had the same radius and damage every time it detonated. This resulted in spamming. But now that I made the radius a variable on the Boom Blast, I just carried over those changes to the Drop Bomb. Now the longer you charge it up, the bigger the explosion and the more damage it does, which makes spamming a lot less viable. Warp Shot is the closest thing to the old Wings attachment. and I admit removing the wings will be missed, and I could definitely bring it back, but hopefully this attachment fills the place where wings once were. Basically, wherever the pellet lands is where you're going to teleport to, and it does a few checks to make sure the teleport location is suitable, so sometimes you won't teleport, but I found this rarely happens. You just gotta make sure you're shooting the pellet in good spots. Also, the longer you charge this up, the longer the pellet flies for, meaning you can shoot it without charging it up and it will teleport you mid-flight before it even lands, so like a short dash. Or you can charge it up all the way and let it fly to the other end of the map before it teleports you. The other cool thing about this attachment is that it works with Charlie's perks. So this and Portal Cloak is basically a guaranteed escape. I've wanted to refine some of the visuals and transitions in this game for a while. For example, to indicate human health and monster burn damage, I used a static image on an FOV blocker, and I was fine with this, but I knew how it could be a lot better. First, I wanted it to be animated, and secondly, I wanted it to be used for transitions, so I came up with this. There's a cone in front of your face with a custom shader. It's a basic noise shader with 2 color inputs and an FOV value. The color inputs control the color, and the FOV is how much of the cone blocks your vision. There's also some other parameters to control the size and speed of the noise. So for human damage, I set the colors to red and dark red. Then the FOV value increases when the player gets hurt. The cool part is when you transition into a ghost. Before, your screen would simply turn blue and your damage visuals would just disappear, all within the same frame. Now, it will smoothly transition. As you continue to take damage, the red visuals will grow and speed up. And when your health finally reaches 0, the colors of your FOV blocker will smoothly shift into blue and dissolve away, and the tint of your vision will also smoothly shift into blue. When it all comes together, it's a clean transition. The visuals for the monster burn damage also got a similar rework. It uses the same shader, but the colors are black and purple, and the FOV value can be increased to block your entire vision. And the transition, the Seeker mode, will smoothly transition in and out of any burn amount, making this a super clean transition. This new system is used for everything that needs visual effects and transitions, like fading to black when switching scenes, the loading screen visuals, or switching characters will subtly display the character's color, human damage, monster damage like I just explained, and even the tinted vision for monster, seeker, and ghost. It's all managed under the same system. I even added a small visual animation for teleporting through certain portals, which reads really well in gameplay recordings. And speaking of that, an unintentional benefit from this new system is that the FOV blocker looks a lot more centered in videos. Anyway, it's just nice to have a central and flexible system for something like this. It cleaned up a lot of code and made it really easy for me to add new effects and transitions, like the scale indicator for the crow. I totally forgot to talk about this when recording, but human headlamps are back. As I was making the Slingshot, design-wise and functionally, I was struggling to find a clean way to add a light source to it. I was going to add a whole front section to the handle, like in front of your fingers, and have the light coming out of that. And functionally, I was going to do the exact same thing as the flash gun. Click the trigger to toggle the light on and off. And this all could have worked, and I could still add it, but while I was working on this, some of the playtesters and I were revisiting an old version of the game where all the zones were pitch black, and all you had was your headlamp and your flashlight. I think this is when the game was the scariest. It also had the first iteration of Heaven as a playable zone, which was intentionally chaotic because I made it smaller than all the other zones and it was pitch black. And I had all of that in mind when I was remaking the New Heaven, but I think a lot of the negative feedback surrounding New Heaven came from it being dark. I think the nice thing about a headlamp is that you don't have to constantly aim and hold your light source. You want to be using your hands for more important things, like using your tools or climbing. So I decided to add the headlamps back to humans, but I made it toggleable with a button. Also, it's now considered an electronic object, which means it's exposed to the entity when active, and electric disruption perks can disable it. And I removed the feature that tinted the color red when the monster gets close just so it doesn't counter mimics. Although I could add that feature back and just make it ignore mimics with a disguise. But even with the headlamp brought back, people still didn't like the New Heaven. So I just made it daytime, and to be honest, I do like it better now, but I do find it less scary and more just plain liminal, so I do want to update it a little more. And ever since I looked back on the darker versions of the game, I've been wanting to add more completely dark areas to all the zones. I think that these areas add a different feel to the game, and they should be treated as a unique area that factors into your strategy. Monsters also have a headlamp, but it works differently than the humans do. They have that feature where the light gets brighter when a human is close, but it also shrinks their light's range, focusing their vision only on the closest target. So these dark areas kind of give the monster tunnel vision. It's easier for them to lose sight of you because their light is weak, but on the flip side, it makes it easy for them to tell if they're close. This makes dark areas kind of frustrating to play as a monster because you have to stay really close to your target or else you'll lose track of them. And if you don't like moving through the dark areas as a monster, use Seeker mode as your night vision. These dark areas also force humans to use their light source, which will be exposed to entities in Seeker mode. So if you want to be fully hidden in a dark area, you have to stand still with your light off in the complete darkness, which can be super scary. Anyway, I'm just saying all this because I want to experiment more with dark areas when I'm remastering more maps. So what's next? Right now, I'm working on a lot of video content. With this update out, the game is pretty close to having all the major features that I set out to create, so I feel like I can make content without worrying about the game being too incomplete. Like over the years, I've had to delete some old tips and tricks videos because they demonstrate strategies that no longer work in the game. Also, all the videos made before this update showcase the flash gun, which is a little misleading, but to me it's more like historical footage, so I'm not going to delete them. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time managing the social media platforms, making sure I've posted all the stuff I can across YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, because there is a bit of backlog of stuff I didn't post, like the long-awaited soundtrack. And I kind of had some fun making unique visualizers for each song. So with this backlog of content out of the way, there's lots of new content to be made. I've been making this game for 4 years, so there's a lot to showcase and talk about. So check back soon for new videos. I've also started a new community initiative, Nightmare Tag Found Footage, which is where I collect and post daily Nightmare Tag clips from the community. So if you have any funny clips, scary clips, or even an edit that you've made, send it over in the Discord and I'll share it on this channel. So after I've dedicated some time to content, I'm going back into development, and I've outlined the final update for this game to reach 1.0. It won't include any huge game-changing features, but it will come with a lot of balancing changes and quality of life updates, and as many remastered maps as I can manage. One thing I can promise is going to be included in this update is a way to see what state your perks are at during a match. Like which ones do you have enabled, if they're on cooldown, how long does it last, what limit does it have, and any other useful stat like that. And for a long time I thought I would do Halo wristbands, and these wristbands would animate like a clock to display things like cooldown, durations, and pretty much everything else. And I could use colors to indicate the perk type. And this idea fits really well with how I feel about UI in VR. One thing you might notice in Nightmare Tag is the lack of a heads-up display and UI. I never want to add a heads-up display that's fixed to your vision. I just don't like it. And outside of the tutorials, I really try to keep text and UI to a minimum. So coming up with a clean way to display all this perk information is tough. And an animated, color-coded wristband was my best idea, until the crow came along. My vision for wristbands doesn't really work with the crow because it has wings. The wristbands can't cleanly wrap around the wrist without clipping through the wings, so I'm kind of back to a brainstorming phase. Right now, my best idea is similar to Bootstrap Island, where the health stats are on this interface hovering above the back of your hand. And I'm thinking this only gets displayed when you're directly looking at it, otherwise it's hidden. But I'm saying all this because I am open to suggestions before I start working on it. So that wraps up Devlog 5. If you're confused by anything I said, ask about it in the comments. I would love to elaborate more on any of these topics. And if you have a suggestion, the best way to get those to me is through Discord. We've collected and organized the best suggestions there, and I often look back at them for inspiration. Also, playtests are open to everyone, so if you're curious about where 1.0 is at, join a playtest. Otherwise, stay tuned here, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.